right, we are live. Hi, everybody, and welcome to SwiftKick's webinar series. Today, we are joined by Greg Norman. Before we dive into everything, I'll just do a quick intro and let you know what's about to go on. And of course, now that I've clicked the live button, my slideshow deleted itself. So, of course, naturally. So here we are today. SwiftKick, maybe you've been to one. We do a bi-weekly series featuring different experts in tech, basically to educate you and find out some fascinating information about the industry. Today we have Greg Norman. He is a web consultant and software developer with 19 years of experience. He is going to lead us into creating conversational interfaces with Google Assistant. And since I don't have my slideshow, I will hand it over to Greg.
Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, actually, let me turn on my presenting mode. I need a screen share here, and I'm going to try this with sharing my whole screen here. And I'll try and keep an eye on the chat if I don't know if I'll be able to keep up with any questions or comments as we're going. But if you have any issues, please speak up, and I will hopefully catch that. I'm assuming everyone can hear me okay, and that the sound and video is good. Turning on the screen share still. Here we go. All right, well, yeah, there goes the infinite screens. Let me see how I can all right. There we go. All right, I'll go into presenting mode here. I do want to make sure I can actually, this is showing up properly. Bring up the. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about Google Assistant and talking about similar kinds of devices and or Google Home to Home devices and digital assistants. I'm going to be focusing primarily on Google's platform, the Google Assistant platform, and all of its related services that it uses. Some of the concepts here will apply to lots of other digital assistant platforms such as Alexa and some of the other ones like that, which this reminds me that I need to mute my Alexa before it starts talking to us. And let me go into presentation mode here. And hopefully y'all can see the, oops. Hopefully I can see my presentation. Let's see here. And sorry for any technical difficulties. So make sure y'all can see everything. Okay, so yeah, so we're talking about here behind these assistant apps, how they work, and also how they, but specifically how you can create kind of like conversational UIs or UX experiences beyond just simple, command controlling things, behaviors that I think a lot of people associate with these kind of assistants. And yeah, I think a lot of examples people see and hear or think of have to do with controlling your lights, controlling your your home devices and Internet of Things, and querying information, what's the weather like and things like that. But I don't know if people are thinking necessarily about the power behind some of these platforms in terms of engaging with and having conversations with and interacting with these platforms. So to introduce myself, as Nikita mentioned, I'm a web developer for about 20 years now and a consultant. I do a variety of different types of technologies and platforms. And I'm moving into and learning more about this, the digital assistant space, and building bots and working with home devices and things like that. A lot of this is still fairly new to me. It's new to everybody. So I'm gonna show what I know, what I've learned so far, and hopefully it can help. And at the end, I'll have open questions, but you can definitely reach out to me afterwards with any other questions that you have about these subjects. One disclaimer I'll give right up front, because we're going to be talking about home devices and assistants, is I'm going to be saying "Okay, Google" a lot, probably. And so if you have that on, like it just did with my phone, it may activate the Google Assistant. So you may want to turn that off. So I'll be saying that a lot. And you can go into your phone settings if you have Google Assistant on your phone, and you can actually disable that. And which I'm going to do right now as well. I'm going to do this first. Well, there we go. Turn that off on my phone. And I'll probably be saying Alexa too as an example. So if you have this on a speaker, I may also activate that, but I'll try not to. So talking about digital devices and home devices in general, there is a problem there that I've already stumbled over, which is that there's no real good term yet, I don't think, for these. I think most people are calling them home assistants or home devices. Examples are Alexa, the various Alexa platforms like the Echo Dot, all of the Amazon ecosystem of devices, the upcoming HomeKit or HomePod, I guess, from Apple, which I think is delayed to like next month or next year, and the Google Home platform or Assistant platform, which runs on a few different types of places. And there's an example here also. I think Cortana runs on these Harman Kardon speakers. So Microsoft is working in this area too, and they've got a whole platform and ecosystem around it. Google Assistant that we're going to be focusing on today is a platform that Google has created that runs in a wide variety of areas that if anyone hasn't used it, you're probably already at least familiar with it. I believe it's pretty much the direction that we're moving in terms of a lot of their offerings, in terms of retrieving information, interacting with your various services that you might use, interacting with the entire Google ecosystem. I think it's going to be more and more ubiquitous, and the direction they're moving in with their with all of their offerings. Assistant runs on, and it's important here to distinguish in a lot of these cases between what's the service platform and then what the various devices are. So you might see, Google Home mentioned a lot, but Google Home is really just a device that runs Google Assistant and has, speaker and microphone capabilities. Sorry, I'm actually just checking the chat. Is there a problem with the loop? Or is that cleared up? Is anybody else having that problem? Okay, if I don't see anybody else, then I'll keep going. But yeah, it runs on the Google Home devices. There's the Google Home Mini. They're coming out with the Max, which is a larger speaker. It also runs on lots of phones, and okay, good. Looks like it's cleared up. Runs on a lot of phones. It's built into the Pixel phones offered by Google, but also is available on lots of modern Android phones, going a little ways back. I'm not sure how far back they go as far as support, but a lot of like the Google Now and things like that you might have used before or heard of are being migrated or moved all and consolidated into the Google Assistant platform, which basically lets you interact with your phone via voice or other ways, and control and interact with all kinds of services and apps and things like that. But it's also on iPhone now, so they're not being, certainly not Android agnostic or Android specific. And of course, because they have the Android Wear platform on on watches, you can also run the assistant on a watch, which is pretty handy. And a lot of this is comparable to like Siri, but I think the Google Assistant platform is a lot more powerful and open. And like I said, Siri is obviously not as ubiquitous or in as many places as Assistant is, and what Google's doing with it. They also have an SDK, which is pretty nice and lightweight, and will basically allow you to install, or manufacturers to install, the Google Assistant platform on pretty much anything, any device. People put them on Raspberry Pis a lot and create their own little mini bots and assistants. And so you might see it in manufacturing and robots. You might see it in speakers. You might see it in Raspberry Pis and other devices, and you probably see it in your fridge. I think it's probably already in your in fridges somewhere. It's probably gonna be in your toaster soon. And most of these examples I'm giving, if somebody hasn't already done it, they'll be doing it soon. And as an example of what you can do with it, this is Google, so of course they have a cardboard version. I think this is sort of an official supported version from the Raspberry Pi people, that basically is a speaker and a mic and a button in a box, and connects to the cloud and lets you do all of the Google Assistant functionality. Pretty much anything you can do with it can be done through this for fairly cheap, which is nice. I guess I'll mention too, if anyone's actually interested in these devices, I should probably mention that there's all the Google Homes are on sale right now because of the holidays. Still on sale after Black Friday, Cyber Monday. And it's the Google Home is like $50 off, and the mini devices are like $20 off, so they're like $30. So just in terms of getting started with using these, even if you don't, you can use it on your phone now if you have a modern phone, but if you want to just get started with the basics of using a basic Google Home, you can get a mini for $30 right now. And so the assistant lets you do a lot of stuff. A lot of this is some obvious stuff you've probably seen before. Do I need an umbrella today? What's the weather like? How's the traffic? Google, because you're in the Google ecosystem, if you are really heavily into the ecosystem, part of what I like about Google and part of the power behind their assistant is that you're automatically connected to all of your other Google platforms and tools and information about you that Google loves to collect so much and use. But because of that, it makes it really, really powerful. So I use the example here of how's the traffic to Norfolk. In a lot of cases, Google might already know where you work, and you can just say, how's traffic to work today? And it will just tell you. And same with your contacts and other stuff like that. And you can also use it to control and interact with other devices in your home. So for example, if you have Chromecast, you can tell it to, watch a show, and actually control it with your voice. So a lot of other things are doing this too, again, but I think Google makes it pretty slick if you have a number of these devices connected to each other. So we're going to talk specifically about, or use as an example, Google Home. I was going to try and have another camera here, but I couldn't get it working separately. But you can see I have if this shows up on the camera, I've got a little Google Home, a regular Google Home here that I will show, and hopefully will. I'm wondering if this lag in the video is just for me, or you open the app. I'm checking here just to make sure I'm seeing everything's working okay. Okay, here we go. So Google Home device. So I'll try showing that as I need to while I'm talking about it. But let's see here. Yeah, so I think I don't know what everyone's particular level of interest or skill is here, but I think most people joining these seminars are probably webinars are probably developers. So we're going to talk about how to develop custom commands and interfaces for these devices, specifically Google Assistant. And because uh, basically, I'll introduce you to the platform, give you an idea of what can be done with it, some of the simple ways of doing it, and then also some of the more complex ways of doing it and some of the potential. I'll give you an example really quick. So a lot of my examples here, what I'm really interested in is health tracking. So I have, for example, this web app I built. It's a mobile app I built a few years ago, probably about 3 years ago. Really simple, mobile-oriented web app. I think it uses Angular and allowed me to basically track quickly various symptoms or whatever other health biometrics and stuff I wanted to keep track of. And as a side project, this took me 2 or 3 months to put together. I'm going to show a quick way of doing this with Assistant that allowed me to do it in one night. And the first interface I'm going to show for doing this kind of thing is with if this then that. And if you're not familiar with if this and that, I'll give you a quick recap. I think most people have used it if you're in tech, but essentially it's a platform for connecting one service to another. So common example is you post something to Facebook, it gets copied over to your Twitter account as well, or if you send an email to turn off your lights in your house or something like that. Any two services, it lets you connect them together, and they support hundreds, if not thousands, of various services out there. And so using if this and that, they have actually a hook for Google Assistant that is sort of like an official thing that once you connect to your Google account, you can actually custom create any command you want for your Google Assistant app or service or device and trigger anything you want using any other service or event. So let's look at some examples. I'm actually going to go ahead and open up IFT, but if I have any connection problems here, I will actually switch. I do have slides available and screenshots if I need them. I am curious in the chat if I'm watching along on my phone with the video, is there a delay with what I'm talking about in my slides? Because it looks like it's like a minute behind what I'm seeing. So I'm curious if that's keeping in track. So I'm going to go under my applets here in IFT. And I'll go through this pretty quickly. I can answer any questions later if anyone's really interested in setting this up and wants to help being guided through it. But I want to move on to the more advanced stuff, so I'll show this as quick as I can. But you can see here I get a lot of things of something happens and I trigger some other event. I do some sleep tracking with my tracking app. I do sending tasks to Wunderlist for my personal to-do list. And you can see I've got a few different health assistant ones here that I've created. I'll go ahead and just open up one of those. Actually, let me back up. A better one would be log symptoms. Okay, somebody said only half a second. Somebody said no real delay, so maybe it's just my phone. Good to know. Actually, maybe make sure I'm on the live. Maybe that's my problem. Okay, sorry. So you can see here I've got an applet, they call them, and I'll go in and configure this. Let me start with creating a new version, but then I'll come and show you the completed version. But essentially you go in and with if this and that, you create this, and you get to pick from all the various services they've got connected. And like I said, there are probably hundreds of them. But if you type in here Google, you will see Google Assistant right here is a supported service. You can pick that. This is assuming if it isn't already, you'll connect and authenticate your Google account and connect it officially and stuff like that. And then you can use various sort of recipes here for saying a simple phrase, say a phrase with a number, text ingredient, various things you can say that it will then parse out. And you just tell it what you want to say, different optional ways of saying it, what it'll say back, and that creates a trigger. And then you can connect that to some other service and make it do whatever you want. And you can see with a text and number ingredient, or recipe, you can put a dollar sign wherever you want the text. And I think with a number one, you can do a pound sign for a number. And you can combine those to say log symptoms. So here's my title for this one. Say a phrase with both a number and text, and you can see I have log symptom with the text and severity number. And that will basically trigger an event in IFT to do something. And it will actually come back with a response where it actually can populate then the text and the number that I passed into it. And in this case, I've hooked it up to Google Docs and Google Drive to add a row into a Google spreadsheet. And you give it the name, you give a formatted row, and you can actually add ingredients here, including your text field or your number field when it was created, and give it a folder. And you can see let's see if this works. Where's my doc? There we go. So lots of stuff I'm recording here. You could actually see one of those applet examples that I was using was the my sleep app that I use on my Android phone. When I turn that on and off at night or in the morning, it will also trigger a record to be entered here. So you would actually see, boy, this is sluggish. Where's the bottom of the list? Here we go. You can see these various items were entered here. Different symptoms I have, different sleep start and times. These are timestamps, they just don't show. And so I can actually, let's see if this works.
By the way, the mic is on mute. To unmute it, press the button on the back of Google Home.
Let me turn the volume on this and hopefully you can hear it okay on my Google Home.
The mic's back on.
There we go. So now I can say, okay, Google, log symptom headache, severity 4.
Okay, I logged your symptom headache with severity 4.
And you should see there that it got entered. Now here's one bug with the, if you're using if this and that with Google Assistant, and this is kind of a known issue, it does not enter the date stamp correctly. It does not, if you put in date created, it doesn't work. So I actually have a Google script running on this spreadsheet that enters the date automatically. That's a side issue I want to get into, but I wanted to mention that. And you kind of saw that there, if this is working in real time, that the row was added and then the timestamp got added. But that's basically the kind of thing you can do. And as you know, if you work in this kind of stuff and work familiar with if this and that, you can imagine all the things you can do with the device, with your voice, to control and trigger events and send emails and whatever you want to do using this device. Having talked about that a bit, I want to bring this over here. That was all examples. So here's one thing to mention as well with if this and that. One of the limitations is that it
the mic is muted.
It really doesn't have to tell me that.
The mic's back on.
Okay. The voice recognition patterns are a little more flaky when you're using if this and that. So it's really cool, it's powerful, simple way of setting up custom commands for these devices, but it does have a lot of limitations. And one of those, as you can see here, is it really gets confused about some of the things I'm trying to tell it. And depending on your wording exactly, so as an example, where it gets hung up or has gotten hung up for me, I was originally using record symptom, whatever. And it would get really confused with that. It wouldn't know what I was trying to ask it. And it would actually trigger this event at random times. Like you can control the volume of the device with your voice. And it would actually trigger a log entry when I was just trying to do the volume. Totally unrelated. I'm not sure what that is. I think it might have something to do with reserved keywords that are apparently not public or anything. So when I changed it from record to log and used the keyword log to do it, everything started working fine. So sometimes there's some trial and error with this to create this kind of thing. But that's just something to be aware of, but it also kind of shows a limitation here. So like I tried to set a reminder for 5:30. It thought I was trying to log a symptom for 5 with a severity of 30. That's not helpful. So if we get into more advanced capabilities, knowing, like I said, probably a lot of people here are developers, we'll talk more about how to actually create for the assistant platform itself, which is the real way to create custom behaviors. Let me just check chat, see if everything's good. And I'll talk really quick. So yeah, what I really want to talk about specifically is how we're going to leverage the platform beyond the limitations of if this and that, and beyond just knowing how to create simple commands with the platform. How do we want to really make it think and interact with you, and what more can you really do with it if you're using their platform? One scenario I wanted to talk about, or I'll just mention because of, like I said, I do a lot of health tracking, is to think about people who have, who can really gain a lot from these types of devices and assistants that you might not think about. So people who might be hospital bound, maybe bedridden, maybe they have mobility issues, maybe they have vision impairment issues. You think about how having something that you can control, interact with your voice, can be really powerful for people like that. And I like to think of it, the example I like to give is that I like to think of the potential of these devices as more as companions, or companions that can help you out more than just a device you send commands to, that I think a lot of people think of these things as. Now, I don't mean that, like, I'm not thinking this kind of companion, which might be the first thing that comes to people's mind in some cases. But I'm thinking more of like this kind of companion. So this is an example I use a lot. If you're not familiar with Baymax, he's from Big Hero 6, and he's one of my favorite characters. Baymax is a he's a robotic healthcare companion. So instead of something that just logs information, he actually interacts with you. He has a personality. He's friendly. He takes care of you. He has expression. He has expression. And what's interesting now, I think about Google and these other platforms and the direction they're going, is I think it's becoming a lot less science fiction to have something like that around. It's going to be a while to get there, but it's really going in the right direction in terms of what these platforms are capable of. So we're going to talk specifically about, with Google Assistant, Google's platform for creating apps, they call it, on Google Assistant platform are supported through a service called Actions on Google, which I honestly am hoping they rename, which they've done with some of their other services, because it's a little vague. But the idea is these are actions that you can trigger on Google's platform using Assistant, or actually potentially other devices, I think. I'll open that up really quick. I've also got screenshots if I have issues. But actually, let me make sure I did. Okay. Where is it? Here we go. Okay, so I'll actually go up to my dashboard. So this is Actions on Google. And you can see I have several different projects here. Different demos, a sample app I started with, and my health tracker. You can actually see I got my own little icon here. And make sure this is keeping up here. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to go into my health tracker. And essentially all Actions on Google is an interface for taking requests and passing them on to other services. It's essentially it's a flow through to another service that does a lot of this heavy lifting, which I'll get to in a minute. But essentially you define all your basic information about your app, the name, how you refer to it. I'll skip ahead here to the app information. And you can see here's, I'm calling it health tracker, and it actually is interested here in the pronunciation. It's saying that my thing is structured incorrectly. I'm not sure why that is. I need to figure that out. I noticed that last night, but I'm just going to ignore it for now. But essentially you can provide details about it, which voice you want to use, because they provide several. They actually just added a couple more a little while back. And you can then add what they call invocations. And an invocation is basically the phrase or keyword that you use to trigger the app. There you go. Get rid of my doc. So this is the invocation is the phrase you're going to use to trigger your app, and obviously it has to be unique. It has to be clear and understandable, and it has to be something that's not going to overlap with anybody else. And it allows you to add several different variations of it. And these are note that these are called sample invocations because it's a smart platform, and it evolves and interprets other words. So if you add these variations in there, but then you come along and say something slightly different, run my health tracker or something, or the health tracker, or whatever, it's going to figure that out. Basically, it's going to understand that. So by using samples here, it's a basis for it recognizing a number of different things you're going to be able to do. And you'll see this throughout their platform. That's what's so great about it, is that what you're doing is providing information for a learning system that's going to both interpret lots of different things to match your patterns that you're providing, but also, I think, learn as you go. So the machine learning behind it will evolve and get better and better, probably the more you and other people use your tool. And so that's some basic information about the tracker and how you set it up. And then I'm also, let me zoom in here. Okay, just checking chat. I've zoomed in a bit. Hopefully this will show up well, and this is all readable. I'm assuming it all is. But you can see here I've got actions set up, and I'm connected to Dialogflow, and that's what we're going to get into next. I'll run that in just a minute. But essentially the actions are what is this going to interact with? what's it going to trigger when you do something. And but there's also additional tools up here. There's analytics. There's a simulator, so you can run it internally without even having a device to test it out, which is a great way while you're working to try different things. And then there's where you connect to backend services. Let me go into that really quick because this will give you an idea of. Here we go. This is kind of tells you the various information about what else you've connected to. So in my case, I'm connected to Dialogflow, which then calls Firebase, which I'll get into in a minute as well. That's a Google cloud function platform. But basically, this tells you what well you're using. And there's some analytics about, I don't have it. I have, let me see. No, I don't have those turned on because I haven't submitted it yet. But the thing to mention here too is that this is tricky. You see down here at the very bottom, you can submit your app. You can do a test draft, which allows you to test it yourself, and that's what I've done. And you can submit it for review, which actually submits it to the Google app. I'm not sure what they're calling it. I guess it's not the Play Store or anything like that. It's the Google Assistant Actions Marketplace or directory that they will then start reviewing it. This particular app, I'm not putting out there because it's a personally set up for me and my use, and I'm not looking to track other people's health information or to have it set up in such a way that other people can just run it and use it. It's kind of configured just for me, but it might evolve eventually into that. So this is an example of something where you can use something yourself, even if you're not sharing it around or putting it in the directory. I'll go over here to Dialogflow. Let me talk about that for a minute. Our screenshots. So Dialogflow is a service that Google provides that was formerly called API.ai. And they purchased this probably a couple years ago, or maybe a year ago. And it's basically they call it AI, but it's basically a conversation engine, I think is the best term for it. It takes input that you're giving it in terms of audio, and it's parsing it and returning information, via voice or other interactions. It doesn't have to be audio. I think basically the actions on Google is what takes your audio and translates that into text content that it passes to Dialogflow. Dialogflow, though, can be used as an engine for tons of different platforms and devices and things you want to use it for. For example, Slack bots or Facebook Messenger bots or anything like that. You can use a Dialogflow to create conversational interfaces for anything of that nature. Okay. And so in our flow here, you see, okay, so Actions on Google runs on the device itself, or doesn't run on the device, but the device directly calls Actions on Google and just passes it. Here's what the user said, do something with it. Actions on Google figures out, based on what was the phrase and the invocation that was used, say, Google run this app. It's going to then call the appropriate Dialogflow project, I guess it's called, that you've set up, and Dialogflow will then figure out what to do with it. So let's look at that. See, where am I on time? Well, okay. Well, you can see here in the corner, zoom in. I have a couple different apps I'm using here. It's the same ones you saw on the other API.ai app list. My health tracker, the facts app tutorial, a demo I did for another talk. And you can actually configure and manage this one here. But essentially, when you start creating an app with Dialogflow, I guess they call it an agent. That's the phrase. You have intents, entities, and then you have fulfillment. Those are the key things you're gonna do. The training and analytic stuff, integrations is all kind of extra stuff that you can explore. You can also see down here they have pre-built agents, which are canned examples basically of interactions. So if you want to do a trivia app, it's already got that set up for you, and all you have to really do is pull in that sort of template and swap out the text or whatever you want to do with it as a starting point. And that's really useful for getting started with some of this stuff. I think that may be what that facts app was doing because it was a pre-built one. So Dialogflow is centered around intents. And if you've heard the term intents before in other contexts, they use it like in Android and other places where it's kind of like an event in a way that it's something you want to trigger based on something else. So intents you can think of them as all the different types of commands and interactions that you want to do with this agent. And some of these in Dialogflow are special cases. So for example, welcome is an important one because I'll click on that. You can see that you have events that will trigger this particular intent. So like in this case, Google Assistant welcome, that's a standard built-in event that occurs that triggers this intent. This intent is listening for that event. I think you can, I guess, only configure one to listen to that event. Maybe, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how priority works there. But basically, when you first invoke the thing, unless you're doing a specific command that it recognizes, you just tell it, to run this app, and it will run this. It'll request this intent or identify this intent and start processing what you've given it to do something with it. And so you can see here with the initial launch one, there's not going to be any user statements along with that, but I'll show you that in a minute in a different example. And there's not going to be any entities included, parameters. You're just saying, hey, run this app. But you can see down here, you have a few different examples of, I actually just noticed that my Zoom is not actually doing anything for you guys. So I'm hoping y'all can read all this fine. Looks like that's just on my screen. Let's see. Everything good with chat? Yeah, like I said, speak up, please, if there's any kind of issues with seeing things. But yeah, you can see here in the text responses, it's going to, these are basically responses it's going to give to that when that intent is triggered. So you can have it say any number of things you want it to say. So it can say, what's going on today? How do you feel? What's bothering you? What's up? You can put in as many things as you want here. And I'll show you later in some of the Google conversational guidelines, they really encourage that you provide lots of different alternate ways of saying things. And that does more than you think to make something personable. Because the main thing that makes people feel like they're just dealing with a robot or a bot is when it just keeps saying the same thing over and over and over again. It's like, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. But if you can vary it up, if you can use some of their input, if you can use some variations, it makes it feel a bit more personable. and friendly. And you can see here also, the other thing that helps with that is using sort of natural language. You don't really want to use language that is just robotic, and feels like a command line response or something. You really want to use something that's going to make it feel like a character or personality. And I've tried to adapt that and use it throughout, all my responses here and interactions. And so I can actually run this really quick as an example. Hey, Google, run health tracker.
Okay, let's get the test version of Health Tracker.
What's bothering you today?
Never mind. So you can see there that it picked one of these 3 text responses and asked me that based on my request. You could also see there as an example what I mentioned earlier about I'm running this in sort of a test mode. Unfortunately, this is kind of a limitation of the platform right now, I think. Maybe they'll change this, but if you're running something just for yourself in a sort of simulation test mode, you get that prefix at the beginning where it says, let's run the test version. I know, for example, with like Alexa, I've worked with that as well. Alexa, you can just run an Alexa skill for yourself that no one else can access, and that's pretty handy. But Google right now doesn't directly support that, where it's basically either running a test mode or it's in their marketplace in the directory. So hopefully they'll change that at some point. There used to be workarounds for that, but apparently those have kind of gone away, where you could just like run it in sort of an extended test mode. But it's not that big of a problem to deal with. So that gives you an idea of a basic intent and the response. And if we get into a more complex one here, let's do a log meal. And now here you can see we're going to use some of the user expressions and parsing how it parses them out. This is another example where what we're providing here are models of examples to train the speech engine and voice recognition engine. What input it takes does not have to match these phrases, but once it's running your app and it's looking for things that you're intents that you're trying to trigger, it will interpret based on the examples you provided here. So you're basically training their language engine. This took me a little while to understand, but basically you can use simple phrases to trigger it, or you can actually say trigger things with parameters. And if it matches these the syntax in a certain way, and it's very intelligent about how it finds these things, it will know that it'll figure out where the parameter is based on these examples you provided. Now you can see here I've gotten several items highlighted, the examples I've used. And if you click on them, actually, let me click expand. You can see that sandwich is identified as it's a parameter that I've called food, and there are all of these data types. The data types are ways that it can figure out what kind of information you're passing in, and if you set it to meet these, it helps the engine figure out, oh, they're talking about the person's talking about this thing. So for like an example of time, if I set this as a time parameter and I say 5:30, it's going to know that's 5:30. It's going to know that that's a time, and that it's not just a piece of text that it's going to do something with, or numbers that I'm trying to pass it in. It's going to recognize that as a time. So it's pretty powerful stuff. And you can also see street address. You can pass in a whole street address, and it will actually validate it for you. And I'll show you how that validation works in a second. But this is really cool in terms of how it processes language and knows what to do with things. So in this case, I can say I ate a cracker, and it will understand that that is a sys.any example. In this case is a sort of an open-ended anything data type. I think there is an actual text one, but I kind of left it open. The other really useful one is a number, where you say, set it as a number 5. It's going to know that 5 is the number 5 and not just the word 5. But in this case, I use any a lot. And it's going to know that, okay, that's a sys.any data type, and it's going to know that that must mean that this is a food. So it's going to know, okay, I've got the food parameter. It's set. Great. Let's go do something with it. So hopefully that's kind of clear. And you can see here, it'll actually list out your parameters. And you are going to give it an action name, and that'll be useful in a minute. In this case, it's log meal. Here's your food. Here's the parameter name, which is the value. The parameter value, which it's going to set to a variable called food that it can use later. And here it has a prompt. So the prompt is used. This is where the validation helps. You can see different scenarios here in which I can say, I just ate, or I just ate a sandwich. It's going to need to figure out, okay, we've invoked this, we've called this intent. Did I get a food parameter? Because I've marked it down here as required. This is a required parameter. I have to have this to proceed, to do anything with this. And if I called one of these first examples to say, I just ate, it's now going to need to find out, okay, great, what did you eat? And that's where it will actually trigger these prompts. These prompts are used for required parameters to come back to you and interact with you to find out more information. So in this case, I might say, okay, what did you eat? What was your meal? What did you have? There's another case where you use a variety of different responses to get more information from the user. And when they come back and they just say, it was a 5, it was a sandwich. It's going to, again, know that, I think actually in that case, unless you phrase it a certain way, basically come back and say sandwich, it's going to say, okay, that's that parameter. It's an any. And it's going to say, okay, I've got that parameter now. We have now fulfilled this action. We now have the required parameter that we needed, and it's going to store that and populate this variable. I'm going to touch really quick on a related thing, which I have not quite used extensively, but also supports this interaction, which is entities. An entity is essentially like a list of preset variables where that it's going to use to match against. So those entities that we're just looking at, we're looking at the food one. There's a food entity. There's a food parameter that used a sys.any. You can create your own entities. Like in my case, I used a symptom, and my symptom is going to pull from a list of things I've provided. Essentially, instead of being a free form value, this is where it's actually going to check it against a list that you've predefined, but is also automated in the sense that, okay, now if I say, like, for example, the sandwich, if it starts learning that I say I ate a sandwich, but then later I say I ate a cracker, it will say, okay, that must be an entity, a food entity. I'm going to add it to the list, and it's going to expand. This is something I haven't explored a lot myself, but the advantage here is that you can't just say, and I'm kind of contradicting myself here. I'm not sure how it does this, but essentially, it's going to learn, but it's going to do it in such a way that if I say I ate a chair, it's going to know that's not food, and it's not going to accept it. But that's just to give you an idea of the fact that you can populate those. Whoops. Populate those intents with entities of your own here, and it'll actually show up here in this list where you do create new, and that's where it's going to set those, and it's going to make sure it matches against that list. But I do know that there is, by saying, okay, make this an automatic expanding entity, it's going to learn. I'm just not sure exactly how that works. But so yeah, now you can do your text responses, and it can say, okay, I logged food variable. Anything else? And it's going to populate these placeholders, and you can vary it up to make it more natural. Say, okay, got it. Sounds good. We're good. Anything else? And in this case, I'm going to use. It's basically enabled to send that response back through Google Assistant. One cool thing here, real quick, I'll show, and I am actually running out of time. I just realized that I'm going to have to breeze through the next part really quick. Adding the message content, you can actually do more advanced responses beyond just a voice response. And if you have the Google Assistant app, for example, on your phone, it will pull these up on your phone to do, say, a basic card with maybe a photo, or maybe you want to return. Maybe you'll ask your assistant, what were our sales figures last month? And it'll come back and tell you, but then also you'll get a card on your phone that shows a graph. That's the kind of cool advanced stuff you could do. And now here's the important part here, is that we're going to use for fulfillment is the part that then hooks this into more advanced logic. And this is the part I'm going to have to skim through pretty quickly to demonstrate how this works. But you're going to use a webhook, which is, basic API, REST API endpoint that's going to be in a specific required format and syntax that that Dialogflow will work with to send this action name that we've specified up here, along with its parameters, and tell you to do something with this, and then send back a response. And that response, it will then translate and send back to the user as a response. So that actually lets you kind of override what's here as far as these default text responses. You can basically make these dynamic on your back end and do whatever you want with it to return more complex data, more complex information that they requested. So that fulfillment, let me go down to that really quick. I'm specifying here our URL for our webhook. And what I think I'm going to do is show you just from the tutorial page what this looks like, rather than demo it, since I'm short on time. So let me talk really quick about Firebase. Examples. So if you're not familiar with Firebase, or even Cloud Functions in general, a very short version of this is that these are sort of mini scripts and apps that run in the cloud. They can be very simple little one-page scripts that just perform some kind of action, return a response. They're usually done over web services, HTTP calls, have them interact with other services and return responses. Another term you'll probably see a lot for these kind of things is serverless, where you're not actually hosting an app or anything on a server yourself or hosting environment. You're just hosting a script in the cloud, and it's there's nothing for you to manage or maintain. You don't have to worry about your hosting, or usually worry about bandwidth and stuff like that up to a certain point. And Firebase in this case is a platform that Google also owns, another one they bought a while back, that lets you run these cloud functions in a number of different languages, and also they have support for databases. They have other services. They have it's an entire cloud hosting platform that lets you create serverless logic and functions. So I'll go really quickly through how that works and how it's used here. But you can see, again, to break down how these things relate to each other, Google Assistant calls the actions on Google based on what you invoke, based on the app you used, app name that it recognized. It's going to call Dialogflow and pass that information to it, and which is going to take that, identify which intent you've triggered, and map those requests to its intent, and parse out the information and handle this conversation flow back and forth. and then that's going to pass this information to your service, which can actually be anything, any kind of web service that you can create and host yourself or on any other platform. You could use an AWS Lambda, you could use Azure's Azure functions. But the advantage of Firebase is a lot of this stuff is provided for you and built in with the Google platform, and it's kind of built around it. So it's kind of the easiest one to use. But Firebase is where you're actually going to perform some logic. You're going to process this request, this action, this intent. You're going to perform some kind of logic. You're going to look up information. You're going to hit other services. You're going to log something or store something in a database and create a response. And actually, let me go back. Okay, so I have here, without getting into all of it, most of the Firebase dashboard doesn't actually do much that you need to interact with. It's basically going to show you, here's our function that we've defined, health logger. You could define multiple functions that it could support, and you can support a database. You could do some file storage, and you can do file hosting, which I've actually used here because I'm not going to be able to get to it, but I have an audio file that the home will play that will you can put up as part of the hosting, where you actually host your own files that you can use in support of this app. And let me see if didn't I open? Oh, I see. I opened the wrong thing. See if this one is it. Yeah, okay. Let me go down here in this tutorial just because they have screenshots. Here's everything we've talked about already. Define the grammar of your conversation and the fulfillment. So in our particular case with our Firebase function, we're going to use Node, which is, if you don't know, it's the JavaScript engine that lets you run JavaScript anywhere and build JavaScript-based apps on servers or devices and they actually have a command line tool for Firebase that you can use to install your Firebase, create, log into your Firebase account, which will authenticate you with Google. It'll step you through those steps, and once you've connected your Firebase, it'll say, okay, you've got these existing projects that you can work with, and create a directory and do a Firebase init, and it will actually populate some of the Firebase libraries and things that you need and file configuration files. It'll ask, do you want to create a database, functions, or hosting? That's just sort of like for the sort of scaffolding template stuff it's going to use. It'll populate that stuff. And you go through and you'll end up with this package.json, which, if you're not familiar with it, that's a standard Node kind of like application definition where you can tell what its name is, a description, your version number, who authored it, and what all of its dependencies are and other libraries that you're using, which in this case are just going to include actions on Google, Firebase functions, and stuff like that. Let me show you really quick, and I'm probably over my time now. Hopefully people can hang around a little bit longer. But I will take questions in just a minute and finish up. So here is sample the application that we're working on. You can see that I've included references here. I won't get into all the different project details here, but basically you've got a lot of the dependencies like the Firebase.json that defines any kind of parameters you need for Firebase and how it's going to be used. Here's where I define that I'm using hosting to host an audio file from the public folder. And you have a functions folder, which is what's running Node. And there's an index.js, which is where your code actually is. In my case, because I'm using Google Spreadsheets and logging this data to a Google Sheets, I can do I have an additional, basically some functions here for doing that. So that's not super important for whatever you might want to use this for. But in my case, because I'm in the Google ecosystem, I can just require these Google APIs. I can authenticate it and connect to my spreadsheet and save that data that way. But this index.js, you can see here I have some different constants. I've got my required libraries, actions on Google, Firebase functions, and then my own Google Sheets one that I just showed you. And then we're defining some constants for the names of the various both functions, actions that we're calling, that we're passing along, and also the various parameters that we're passing along, so we can use those later. Then here we're defining a couple of different functions. I'll stick with the meal one for now. This is simpler. And essentially, you know, it's passing in this app that we've defined, and it's going to get the argument what meal was passed along. It's going to look for that. If it's, I should have some verification here. Theoretically, this would never even get called if it didn't have that parameter because of the validation already, but I should probably check here, did meal get passed? And if not, go back and ask for it. But since it's probably been validated, I haven't included that yet. But basically take that meal and append it to our spreadsheet and then send back a response. There's a number of different ways you can do, like app.ask, there's app.tell, there's a number of other methods that you can send back that let you do more powerful things. Ask gives me particularly what I want, which is to keep the line open to do additional actions. But you can see with symptom, I'm passing in 2 parameters and then saving both of those to my spreadsheet. And then sending them back with those variables populated. And then the rest of the stuff down here is basically very simple, you know, node stuff that lets you say, okay, make these functions available everywhere, create a map that's going to map, this is an action map, basically takes these action names I've defined up here, like log meal, and it's going to associate that with this log meal function, so that when we come down here and create our request, create our API AI app, which has actually been renamed. Now it's Dialogflow. I just haven't updated this library. It's going to create a Dialogflow class and pass in the request from Dialogflow when it calls it. And it's going to handle that request using this action map. So basically what this comes down to is it's going to take the fact that we've passed in log_meal as our action and do something with it. This app.handle request is now going to trigger all the rest of this stuff to happen. It's going to say, handle request is going to say, oh, they're looking for log_meal. That is this function up here, log meal. It's going to call that and pass the argument that we're going to pull out, which up here is called food, is the one that we, as you recall, we had a $food parameter variable. And then you can basically send a response back. So a lot of this then is done through the command line, because then you basically go down here and say, deploy the fulfillment. You say Firebase deploy, and there's some different parameters for that. And it'll run for a while, and it'll say deploy complete. And it's actually has now, by doing that, it's published it up to Dialogflow, because you associate it with your account, because you've at another point here you define which project it is that you're working with. Looks like I closed it. Yeah, at that point it's then published that function and is now available as a fulfillment down here. And it'll tell you when you do that publishing what the URL is that you'll use, and that's where you populate here. So once that's set up, those Dialogflow endpoints as intents will use that fulfillment and send back, you know, whatever response you did based on that. So I know I went through that pretty quickly. I hope it made sense. My main goal here is to give you ideas of just how this stuff works. I'll show you here as well. I'm not sure why this is still loading, but there is an inline editor that you can use in which you can just bypass this whole URL thing altogether and just, you can disable the webhook and enable the inline editor. You can actually put JavaScript right here and just, it uses Node as the backend, as the underlying engine, and do some JavaScript to handle your requests all right here and skip everything I just showed you. But obviously, using your own project, using a separate hosting cloud function is more powerful. You can do a lot more with it. You can include external libraries like my Google Sheets example, and other things like that. So that's usually preferable. But if you're doing something very simple, you could actually just do it all right here. So let's see, is there any other, I'm well over time now. A lot of this stuff you can get, I really want to emphasize like how great their documentation is and their tutorials. Everything I've learned here has been through working through their tutorials. But you can also, one thing I'll show really quick is that you can chain requests to say, you can do follow-up intents so that one intent triggers, actually, did I do this one? Let me do shutdown. I think I changed this. So the shutdown intent is going to listen, it's going to trigger based on the phrase shut down. And I'm doing this as an example. Usually I would do the quit one that has a number of different phrases you might use. Say, I'm done. Okay, never mind. And all those things will trigger it to quit the app and return to normal Google Assistant state. But using these contexts, you can trigger an output context, which is kind of like triggering an event that other intents listen for. So in this case, it's quit confirmation. So the purpose here is you want to say quit. It's going to say, are you sure you want to quit? And this is how you can chain different intents together. In this particular case, the quit confirmation, and actually, let me go back to that. You can see it's going to ask, it can ask a question that triggers these other intents with your response, so that you see the context here is the quit confirmation is an input context on this intent. So the back and forth, I wish I had a diagram of this, but basically I call it and trigger the shutdown, the quit intent. When it comes back to me with a question of, okay, are you sure? It's going to set this context so that when I respond, it's going to know I'm running within this context of quit confirmation. My response based on what I say is either going to trigger this intent or the no intent or the yes intent based on my response. If I say, sure, it's going to say, oh, that's a yes, I'm going to shut down. Or if no, it's going to say, okay, well then let's keep going. I'll demo this really quick and also give you an example of how the natural language works this way and how this is helpful in creating a sort of personality with your assistant by saying, okay, Google, run Health Tracker.
Okay, let's get the test version of Health Tracker.
What's going on today?
Shut down.
Are you satisfied with your care?
Not really.
I cannot deactivate until you say you are satisfied with your care.
I am satisfied with my care.
Okay, goodbye.
So if you've seen Big Hero 6 and you're familiar with Baymax, that gives you an idea of that's how he works in the movie. So I'd like to play around with that and give an example of the back and forth response of how one intent triggers the next intent, which triggers another action like shutting down. And by providing all these various phrases, in this case, all these phrases are not, in the case of the yes, you can say, I am satisfied with my care is what I've provided as the expression. If it doesn't find this, if it doesn't recognize it, it's going to go to the no and say, I can't shut down. So hopefully that helps. I will go ahead and open up to questions really quick. I know I've run pretty well over what we planned of the hour. If you have any questions at all in the chat, feel free to ask. That pretty much wraps things up for me. covers a lot of what I want to talk about. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them. If not, you can also reach me on Twitter at RailShark. And let me just give it just a minute to see if there's any questions.
I'm just going to come back on here while we're waiting on questions and give a little update from my PowerPoint that failed me earlier. Upcoming webinars in the series. On December 20th, we have Paul Chin Jr. with Serverless Forecast. January 17th, first one of 2018, is Emily Freeman, and she has yet to tell us what hers will be about. And then January 31st, we have Matt Groves, waiting on his subject as well. Linda Nichols will be joining us on Valentine's Day, subject to be determined. And Josh Carlisle will be joining us at the end of February on the 28th with Be More Productive Than Ever with Azure Functions. So that's just a little update of what's coming down the line.
Okay. All right, cool. Looks like there's not any questions.
And if there are any more questions for the Mont Greg, or if you're watching the replay, you can type in your question and we will receive an email to forward on for you.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to answer any questions that come in later on the recorded version of this. And here's also a link to my Twitter in the chat if anyone's interested in that.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yep. Thanks a lot.
And everyone have a great day.